So, hello, world. This is Shruti Pandey, and today on itishruti, I have one of my favorite people in the pre-sales world, in the pre-sales universe, and I consider myself immensely lucky that he connected with me over LinkedIn during the pandemic. I don't know how he found me, but I'm so glad he did. We stayed in touch, and despite the fact that I'm sitting in India and I see his amazing career journey from hospitality to pre-sales, heading it, leading it, cracking it, being at the top of his game, then starting his own venture, then now becoming a head of GTM. It's been a crazy ride to see from afar. Let's understand his story from the horse's mouth. So thank you so much, James, for being on this podcast. Really,
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. And as we talked about even before we recorded, I really appreciate your support throughout the years. Right? We've got to know each other over the last couple of years, and I've always appreciated your support and your messages. And even when you started your podcast, very proud of you for making that step and making that leap. I know it's hard, so congrats to you, and I'm glad to finally be here.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. And before I start fangirling now, I hope I don't. Let me start with some questions and keep it, normal for myself. Not you,
Sure.
but for myself. So I have created three questions for you, James. And my first question is anybody who would have, a good look at your LinkedIn or your
Yeah.
career trajectory, it's amazing. Like you're a jack of all trades, if I were to say it in simple words. You started off with hospitality industry, then you got into solutions. You were at the top of your game, like I mentioned, at Salesforce. I want to understand what exactly led you to getting into pre-sales or solutions. How did
Yeah.
it happen?
I've had quite the twisty and turny journey, and I am very proud of it, right? Because I think if I can do it, anybody can do it. And I think the biggest thing for me and the core concept that matters here is transferable skills, right? For me, always figuring out how and where I could use my transferable skills. So actually, even taking a step back from hospitality, I used to work in, excuse me, athletic operations. So I used to work in facility management. I used to work sporting events. I used to run sporting events. I used to run sports teams. I used to be a coach. And so I understood the operation of everything. And even when I used to like coach sports or run events, like even as a student, I ran a basketball tournament for my region at UNLV that was multi-day, 40 team, right? You have to learn all those details of the operation. And I actually took those to hospitality. And I learned what customer service was all about in hospitality and hotels and that operational experience. And when I made the jump to Revenate, which was a hospitality technology company, I tell people all the time, I became the subject matter expert in that business. I was one of the only people who had hospitality operations experience. And when you're like new to the job and new to tech, you're really trying to figure it out, but I knew the operation. So people would come to me and ask me questions about how a hotelier worked. What did a hotelier think of this? Like, and this is actually how I got into solutions and pre-sales is that because I knew the hotels so well,
Yeah.
and let me add, I started in onboarding. I started in post-sale and deployment,
Oh,
and I was implementing customers, and we would have these big deals, and they would call me to be like, hey, like we didn't have SEs at the time, right? So they
right.
would call me and be like, hey, James, I need you to talk to this hotel. And I would get on the phone, right, with these like executives who owned, managed 5 hotels, 25 hotels, and I would talk the lingo. I actually went over to Lisbon and met with Corinthia Hotels and talked about how our technology worked in their hotel operation. So I became an expert immediately, right? And that's what I really want to stress here is I became an expert because I knew hospitality, so I was able to make that jump. And once I learned this post-sale side of things, I became a solutions engineer, and then I joined Showpad as the first SE, and that's where I built my career over 4 years as like the first SC to building a team to running North America to owning a lot of global responsibilities and then going to Salesforce, right? So there's always that transferable
Yes.
aspect of things. And I learned so much along the journey. But again, that's what I tell people all the time who are trying to break in. Like, you're an expert at something. Go find a company that needs your expertise.
Wow. I think I need to have this line or your statement somewhere put on the wall or Yeah, because it is true. It is true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if you, okay, I don't want to take this away from you, but you reminded me of a couple of things from my life because I was good at tech and automation. And when I first transitioned into pre-sales, there was no such thing as pre-sales or solutions, right? Like you
Right.
said. So,
Right.
and given the fact that I'm sitting in India, it's even more complicated. People don't understand what's pre-sales or solutions. So, yeah, having that, it's so important when people see pre-sales or solutions engineer, they need to understand for themselves. They need to have some expertise, one expertise, and if they make the switch, it's going to be so much more better for everyone.
Totally. Absolutely. Right. And again, like, you know, if I think about my own career, I went from, you know, operations to technology post sale to technology pre sale, right? To SE pre sale, SE leader pre sale in the startup, big enterprise, right? When I was at Salesforce to entrepreneur, right? To now back in tech as head of go to market, right? Every step along the way was essentially curated
Yes.
to make me more successful in the next step.
Yes. In fact, when you mentioned about, how you were managing all the events for the sports team and everything, it made me realize you were cut for creating something like PSE way, way, way back. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure.
You're totally right. It's but most people don't know about all the failures that happened, but like a small fun fact about me that a lot of people don't know is I used to be the sports writer for my university, right? So I would cover sports. I was a writer in college as like a part-time job for the university. And I actually had three different professional sports websites. Like I had writers that worked for me. It was all volunteer stuff at the time, but this was,
Yeah.
10, 15, maybe even 20 years ago. And so all that stuff plus operations and sport really prepared me for PSC. And so when I was running events with PSC, I had already done it before, right? I had already the building blocks. And so I do is like reflect back and like translate it to virtual. But you're right. Everything we do in our past prepares us for our present and in the future.
I think what people don't realize when they see, others as personas and legends and everything, they fail to understand how much they have tried, how much they have failed, how much they have cried to get there. And all of that experience is what made them come here. And let me take a step back and ask you my second question, which is pre-sales collective, and I have so many follow-ups also for this one because you, like I mentioned, and I'm repeating myself, you were at the top of your game. Life is all hunky-dory, right? Why not stay at everything good and enjoy
Yeah.
it rather than starting something of your own, something as massive a giant as pre-sales collective? Like
Yeah.
what really happened that made you start it off?
Yeah. PSC is like a household name now, right? In the profession. But a couple years ago, it was just a random idea, and I think for me, I had gone from working in startups where I was wearing a million hats. I was traveling the world all the time. I was really, really, really busy. And that was an amazing experience for me. When I got to Salesforce, I realized like I had so much to learn about enterprise and big company, but my job scope actually shrunk down. And one of the reasons, and in parallel, one of the reasons I moved to Chicago was Showpad had opened their US headquarters there. And I had been involved in San Francisco in like the sales engineering meetup. And so when I was going to Chicago, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start this myself. I want to help build a community of people here in Chicago, right? So if you think about the parallel paths, I'm building, I'm growing my enterprise experience at Salesforce. I'm learning what it's like to be at a big company. And then I'm running this like local Chicago community that's gaining a lot of traction on the side. And my co-founder, Yuji Agashi, and I had gotten connected through some people because we were both trying to figure out our solutions teams and the solutions organization. And we started just dumping some time into this concept called PreSales Collective, where we were like, should we have the first ever SE conference or should we start a community? In hindsight, luckily we didn't do the conference because the pandemic happened and that's why we accelerated PSC, right? But for me, I was learning so much at Salesforce, but I was having so much fun with PreSales Collective. And it was mine and Yuji's, and we were building and the responsibility and the accountability. And I had to ask myself, like, okay, how big can PSC get if Yuji and I both go full time? And is that a bet worth taking, right? And I'll make this comment is I tell people all the time when they're thinking about jobs or careers is to assess risk, right? I'm a risk taker, right? And I think a lot of times, respectfully, people in solutions are not risk takers all the time, right? They can be a little bit risk adverse. And so I think, what is the worst case scenario? And I asked myself with PSC, what is the worst case scenario? Is the worst case scenario that I leave Salesforce, go and run PSC, and get a better job coming out of that experience? And, I'm able to pay my bills through that 1 or 2 years. And the reality was like, yes. And what was the upside? The upside was that I could change my life financially, professionally, and that's ultimately what happened. So I know that was a longer answer, but again, to the point of like understanding the parallel paths that got me to where I was to make that bet, right? And betting on myself and betting on, this concept or idea that we had a lot of vindication on was ultimately the option. And when PSC started, it snowballed. And I'm not afraid to say, like, I think we had a little bit of lightning in a bottle. We executed really, really well. We had high quality events, but because of the pandemic and everyone went inside, people were looking for something and we filled that void. And when we filled that void, it just snowballed from there. And so I'm very fortunate to have been on that journey and super thankful for everyone who leaned in and got us there. And, super thankful for Yuji as a great co-founder and partner as we were navigating those waters for those couple of years.
Yeah, Yuji, I think, yeah, a shout out for him is well deserved. But I think while you mentioned about the pandemic thing and everything snowballing, it makes me realize the fact that timing of anything is so important. Like,
Yep, it really is.
I mean, as much as I've talked to a couple of founders and they keep insisting on the luck part of it, and it's great that you guys are grateful about it. But I think it's also about the timing, right? Because if it's before or after, it doesn't
Yep.
work the same way.
If I think about if we were starting PSC today, I don't know if it would be as successful as it is, right? Because we really filled the void, right? We were the
Yeah.
first and big item, big community in the market. And nowadays people are back to their normal lives and traveling and out and about and not stuck inside all day, right? So do I want to believe that PSC would have, done the same thing should we have launched it now? Of course, I want to believe that, but I'm also a realist and think that like we had perfect timing, and we had really good execution, right? Like we built something that was more than just a business, right? It was really a community, and I think we are early to the community game too, because a lot of communities have started since, and so again, very thankful for that journey, and timing really is everything.
So I want to understand two things with respect to PSC. One is, how did you get your initial clients or customers? Because sometimes people feel, does community give me money if I'm running something like that? But I think it's a myth. It gives you good money.
Yeah.
I can see that smile on your face. It was so amazing. So one is that, and my second part to this question is, what have been your biggest learnings or experiences
Yeah.
from PSC?
I laugh about the money thing because my point of view on community and community businesses is very different than most, right? I look, even when PSC was before PSC was purchased by the company that it was, right? We were exploring different options and different avenues for growth. And we had some other community businesses that were wanting to buy us, and part of their requirement was that we charged all of our members. And that was a non-negotiable for me, right? And so if I think about PSC, why I laugh there is that I typically like to buck the trend, and I always believed in a free forever community. And what that means is that we were going to provide value for free just because we felt it was the right thing to do. And so if you think about like our model, we for that first few months really, and ultimately for like the first year before things started to change, we just put out as much free content as humanly possible, and we didn't want to charge anybody anything. And I will say, like, in hindsight, sure, that probably capped some of our revenues, but like free forever community is something that I really believe in, and delivering value in free forever community is really hard to do. And so I didn't want to monetize the people that were in my community. I wanted to monetize the people who wanted to talk to the people in my community. So we built that business primarily on sponsorship revenue, right? So companies like Consensus and Vivint, right?
Yeah.
Those companies had reached out to us because they're like, hey, we're selling to the solutions audience. We want to get in front of them. But I was very, very particular about it not being a Shark Tank, right? I don't want it to be like a, Shark Tank sales pitch, bad user experience.
Right.
At the end of the day, because I think most communities fail at that,
Yes.
unfortunately. And I'm on the vendor side now, so I get it and I understand why if it's not controlled. But like that to me was the biggest thing is getting, and we started to deliver so much value. We were delivering value to our community members, we were delivering value to our sponsors and partners. And then that started to snowball. And realistically, once we had the sponsorship revenue, I was able to do a lot of things with that, right? I was able to hire employees. I was able to invest in programs and building programs out. And then once that started to happen, think about, we rolled out a private leadership collective where we're only charging a very minimal amount compared to what some of these other leadership groups charge, right? Because we wanted some revenue to help build an employee. Again, at the end of the day, there's lots of ways of doing that, but value is the most important and providing that free forever. And if I think about PSC and what it meant for my learnings, I could sit here and talk all day about all the things that I in this experience.
Yeah.
I think what I learned the most, and I think about the people that I worked with and that volunteered for us and worked with us, is that some people have a really, really high caliber that they hold themselves to and execute to. And I found that this is probably my most profound learning of the experience, is that some people can execute really, really well and put out real high quality of work. And some people can do that extremely fast as well. And I found that when you're working with hundreds and hundreds of volunteers over years, you really start to learn who cares about their craft, who puts the time and energy in, what is their output and what is the impact that it makes. And that was such a great learning for me, is working with people who really cared and being like, wow, they're raising the bar and raising the level of expectation. So that was like, I think, one of my most profound learnings about people that I worked with generally.
Oh, like you mentioned yourself, that there are plenty learnings from PSC. I couldn't have imagined that to be the answer. I mean, I was wanting to know what would have been your biggest learning, and
Yeah.
that is not something I would have ever thought of. And while PSC has been a lovely, lovely ride and journey for you and many of us, because,
Yeah.
even from distance when we were looking at it, it was different from other communities as such. The hard work was so, so, so evident, I think, which is why I connected, which is why many of the people around the globe connected with, the sense of PSC, the value of PSC. I mean, it's such a difficult question to even ask this. How did PSC really help you, in moving away from it and getting into tech again and
Yeah.
becoming who you are today, the CRO thing or the head of GTM? How
Yeah.
did it help you get into that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, PSC was such an amazing journey, right? And it was the most rewarding experience of my entire career. One of those things, and one of the things that has always been core to me, is making sure that PSC could live on forever. The concept of a legacy has always been important to me. And I know when Eugene and I made some of the decisions that we did as a business, it was always that PSC could live on forever, well beyond us, right? And, if I look 10 or 15 years from now and, PSC still going and still existing, like that's something that we created that nobody can ever take away from us, right? And when I even say we, I also mean all the community members that leaned in, right? That could say, oh, I remember when PSC first started, or I remember when we just had a couple small events. Um, that experience, really taught me a lot, because I learned to trust myself and trust my instincts and my gut. With all due respect, I think a lot of times in my career, I worked for people who I didn't agree with, or didn't agree with their values or how they went about things, the decisions that they make. And, were made, it used to get me frustrated. Yeah, I used to get frustrated about it. And I'm sure I was, looking back, probably a difficult employee in a lot of places because I was always challenging the status quo. And, it, that's just the reality is you have bosses and you have leaders and you're not responsible or accountable for a lot of the decisions. You're an influencer. But when it came to PSC, I learned to trust myself in my decision making, in my ability to move fast, my ability to have high quality work. And I loved the accountability and the responsibility. I could never go back to a place where I've got like 8 bosses who tell me what to do. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work for me. Even though now people work for me and that's probably what I do. But to me, like that made me realize that like being an SC was a superpower, right? I got so much exposure to so many different parts of the business. And then I was able to, work hard in the role at PSC to learn and trust myself and push myself. And that couple years of PSC, I grew more than in any, professional point of my career, right? And so when I figured like what was next, and I was thinking about starting my own business, I was thinking about going into consulting full time. I started to think, what did I want? And I wanted to own all of go-to-market. And it's a challenge for myself because my title outwardly is Chief Solutions Officer, but I'm a head of go-to-market, more like a traditional, like a CRO that oversees everything. Exactly. So I oversee marketing, I oversee revenue and sales, I oversee solutions, customer success, support, customer engineering. Like my scope is really broad. And it is a very, very hard job. And I absolutely love it. Right. And so, again, all these things have prepared me to be able to look and understand value and delivering value throughout a continuum and understanding how to build an org structure that moves quickly, that makes decisions, that's aligned. And we can do that at TestBox because we're small enough, but we're super nimble. And there's no silos. There's no, this is my job. This isn't my job. This is your lane. This is my lane. We in software have forgotten who matters in this last decade of SaaS, and that's the customer. And so, obviously growth at all costs, software was booming. We lost sight of the customer. We created these roles and these silos because we thought it was doing the best in the best interest of the customer, but it wasn't. And so now there's a new wave. And to really answer your question, like to close your answer, close my answer to your question. I believe that there's a new wave of go-to-market, and I believe that my solutions experience was my superpower to get me to run, be an entrepreneur and run my own business, and now take those learnings to go-to-market and SaaS and help build the next playbook in B2B SaaS. That's something that I put on my plate as something I want to accomplish, and I'm very thankful for all the experiences that got me here to do it.
I think when you're mentioning about, your story, which was unfolding so beautifully, I could see it really in front of my eyes. And there was one voice which was like shouting and screaming in my head, which was about customer. And you're absolutely right in saying, and thank you for saying it out loud, because people really have forgotten, or I'm sorry to say, don't care what the end user or the customer is feeling about it. So the more trust we can have. I remember there were days when people would be like, why do you care so much for them during POCs, right? As pre-sales people, I'm pretty sure we get to hear that a lot, and you would have heard that too. But unless I am a trust partner for somebody, why will they put in their money for buying something, right? And I think your journey, my journey, keeping aside my story and seeing your story, right? How it was unfolding right from your college days, your sports days, and hospitality and everything. I think you were in some way or the other focused on being customer centric. I think thank God for that, which is still stuck with you. And I'm pretty sure you're going to hit that playbook very, very, very soon. And you're probably already implementing it for sure.
Yeah, we definitely have, and and thank you for those comments. And we've seen the successes, and I think what I learned with PSC too is share your learnings, right? Like sharing your learnings is a great thing to do because you'll help people out. People who worry about somebody copying you, or right, execution is everything, right? And so I believe that most people can't execute at a really high level, right? And that's what kind of separates ideas from reality. And so, sharing those learnings and sharing that playbook is great. And I think we've seen a tremendous impact, and we've made changes ourselves, right? Like we've made changes a couple times. I've reorged the business, just slightly tweaking and tweaking to get to that right model to help customers out. And so I'm super thankful to be in this position, and super thankful for Sam, my CEO, and TestBox for giving me this opportunity and truly letting me feel like I'm a true partner owner in this business, so that I can run and make decisions and not have somebody telling me what to do all the time, just part of the time. So
I so wanted this podcast to happen, and having you on the show and spilling out all the secret sauce and secret beans about your journey. And I'm so grateful and so thankful to you that you did. I'm pretty sure people are still stuck and listening to you and your story and your experiences. Any parting thoughts that you would have for them, like any advice, given the fact that the market still isn't very
yeah,
great, and everything happening with layoffs and job market, and in
yeah,
general, sales is not getting any easier with the market situation. So any piece of advice for them, I think it would really help.
yeah. When everyone's zigging, you need to zag, right? When things start to become a trend, you need to start doing something different, right? And I think that applies in SaaS, that applies in outbound. Right now, that certainly applies for trying to get a job, and so I think for most people, when something starts to catch on, you start to see a lot of folks copy that, right? I learned that actually. It's one of my bigger learnings at Salesforce is I had this unique position where I supported East, West, and Central, and I would try things in different regions. And then the other regions would hear about them and want to copy the program, right? So I was like, all right, this is how I build influence. And I just did something a little bit differently, and learn that like that copycat model is just human nature, right? When we see people doing things, we want to do those same things. But like try to find those people and those folks that are giving advice to do something a little bit different. I'll give again UG and Maddie a shout out, my former partners at PreSales Collective, of what they're doing with Better Career. Like they're giving advice to people on like how to stand out in that interview process. So I think for most folks, I know that can be a little bit broad of like what does that actually mean, but like try to stand out, right? Try to find ways to stand out in the crowd with no matter what you're doing. And I think that's advice that I've carried through most of my life. Sometimes it hasn't worked well for me, but other times it's worked very well for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I think we have remembered UG so many times. I feel like getting him on the next podcast. I
Yeah,
hope he says a yes, and I think I can record something with him too. So thank you,
totally.
James. Really, thank you so
Of course.
much. This really means a lot to me, and hearing from you your experiences, it's something else. I can keep talking. I can just stop the recording and keep talking more with you, but a time limitation for all of us. So thank you so much, and really can't thank you enough.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It was really wonderful talking to you, and keep up the good work, right? I know this is hard to consistently do a podcast and to do it for the timeline that you have, and it's very inspiring. So keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Of course, take care.